Hello, chefs. This is Chef's PSA Podcast. I'm your host, André Natera. On today's episode, we're going to talk about why you need to respect the last generation of chefs. Stay tuned. Now, before we get into it, quick update. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else, make sure you leave 5 stars. Nothing less than 5 stars. It's a 5-star podcast. You already know that. If you want to support the show, well, a couple things you could do. One, you could go subscribe to my Substack. I'll link it in the show notes. You get exclusive podcasts there. You get access to free ebooks, classes, the Culinary Leadership Fundamentals video course. I put up an exclusive podcast last week titled Leadership Secrets. I'm putting up another one today, exclusive podcast for Substack titled How to Win the Game. You could also go to chefspsa.com and you get all the books there, including Culinary Leadership Fundamentals, Line Cook Survival Manual, Kitchen Art of War, Bad Sue, Good Chef, and so on, as well as many free ebooks, including 100 basic recipes, critical path to opening up a restaurant, a food cost mastery guide, and a lot more. Plus, I released some new merch. You can see this hoodie that I got, Super Soigné white Chef's PSA hoodie. I just put out some new stuff on the Chef's PSA store, the Just Cook line of chef's wear. So go get that while you're at it. Anyway, what is this episode about? This episode is about respecting the chefs that came before you. I think there's a certain rite of passage that we all have to go through where initially we think our chefs know everything, and then we believe that they know nothing, and then we think we're better than them. And then we call them up for advice because we realize they were right all along. Similar to the relationship that we have with our parents. A lot of us, at least, right? Sometimes you think your parents know everything when you're young, and then they know nothing when you're a teenager. And then when you get older, you realize that maybe they were right the whole time. Maybe not all parents, and maybe not all chefs. But there's something to be said about the previous generation that came before you. I like to use the expression, if you had to dig a 10-foot hole, and someone else dug 9 feet, and the only thing you had to dig was the remaining 1 foot, could you take credit for digging a 10-foot hole and give no credit to the person that dug the first 9 feet? Well, that's basically what happens here, because a lot of new chefs get in position and they want to diminish the old guard as if everything that is current is right. Everything that you're doing right now with regards to food trends, the way that you cook, what's popular, that's the right way to do it because it's now. You may have blind spots. The previous generation thought the exact same thing, and the one before that thought the exact same thing. So who's right? There'll be a generation in front of you that's going to look at what you're doing now and think it's wrong. When I was a young chef and I got my first executive chef job, my chef mentor was still in the building. And I remember when I got that job, I thought to myself, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change that. We're going to stop using that Morton's kosher salt and go to Diamond Crystal. We're going to make our stock this way, because I like oxtail in my stock. And I started making little subtle changes because now I'm the chef and I knew better. And I tried so hard to outshine my previous chef. The funny thing is when you're in the shit, that's the first person you call. Everyone knows what they're doing until they get to that point when they realize, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing and I need help. And then you start to understand some of the decisions that were made and why they were made. You have to think about all the chefs that came before you. You know, you look at the chefs that are very relevant right now, and even the chefs that I may name might not be the most relevant chefs, but they're relevant to me. When you think about a lot of these Nordic chefs, Rene Redzepi, you know, he's the king of the Nordic chefs. And you have to think to yourself, they learned that from somewhere. Yes, they put their own interpretation and their own personality into what they did with their restaurants and their food, but they learned it from somewhere. They had to have come from great kitchens. They had to pass through there. There's no way around it. We all went to culinary school. Well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us went to culinary school, and we had chef instructors there that were teaching us the fundamentals, the classics, the classic repertoire of Escoffier, classic cuisine. How do you make a stock? How do you make a consommé? What are the 5 mother sauces? No one ever talks about the father sauces. Are there father sauces? I don't know. And you build this foundation by going to culinary school because when you leave, you have a certain skill set that the employer, as the chef who's hiring you, knows that you should have a certain baseline of knowledge. They're not expecting you to perform at the highest level right out of culinary school. They're expecting you to have the basics. You know how to use a knife. If they tell you, do you know what a brown stock is? You know what it is. If they ask you to make a bechamel, They know you have a general idea of how to make a bechamel or a hollandaise or a velouté, or you know what mirepoix is, you know basic terminology, you know how to move in a kitchen, you know what the uniform looks like. You don't need the culinary dictionary to answer every question. If I tell you I need something, there's a good chance if they taught it to you in culinary school, you'll have a vague understanding of what it is. So where do we begin to respect the teachers at culinary school, right? They are the ones that are providing you with your first level of education. I am still in contact with my very first chef. My first chef instructor and I are still friends to this day. Spoke to him last week. Shout out to Kirk Bachman, who has the Ultimate Dish podcast and runs the Escoffier schools. So another good podcast to go check out. But I owe him a lot. He gave me my first lessons. He taught me about stocks and sauces and Culinary 101. Taught me how to use a knife. Taught me how to not be afraid and to not get my hands dirty when marinating chicken. I'm using my chef in a practical sense. His father was also a chef. Who taught him, right? One of the chefs that I worked under for many years taught me so much. The fundamentals, how to make a stock better than how I made it in school, how to improve on the fundamentals that I have. But who taught them? We think we just arrived at the internet or the light bulb. We don't think about the hundreds of failures that went into developing something before it got to the point which it's usable for us. Bad ideas get pruned off. 100 hours of doing something gives you the right to make the decision on it because you've already figured out the variations and the nuance. The person questioning it and being told hasn't put in the 100 hours to do it yet. So you have to give respect to the person who, through countless hours of trial and error, figured it out. We take a lot of things for granted, and you don't have to like everything about the current system. But had it not been for Escoffier codifying everything for us, developing the kitchen brigade, structuring kitchens in a certain way, giving you guidelines for many recipes, where would we be right now? Respect is due there. Where would we be if it weren't for chefs like Marco Pierre White or Pierre Kaufman or Paul Bocuse or Joel Robuchon? Everyone out here making Robuchon potatoes, and no one stops for a minute to think, how long did it take Joel Robuchon to come up with that? How did he figure it out? How many times did he fail before we got to the end product? And what were the iterations after that to make it more efficient for service? You know, a lot of times I put up these chefs' PSAs like, no one cares how you did in school. No one cares how you did it at your last job. Partly true, partly not true, because respect is due to the person that taught you and gave you some new skills. Now, it doesn't mean that they necessarily translate to the new job. You have those skills now. They belong to you and they were taught to you by someone. And unless, you know, they're tuning into another dimension and downloading information directly into their brain, they learned it from someone. And I promise you, most of the things that I've seen in cooking haven't been downloaded from the ether. And sometimes we like to give shit to culinary students when they come out of school. They say, well, in school, they taught me how to do it this way. Or for example, you're doing it wrong because school said to do it like this. So if you're a culinary student, I want you to listen to this right now. There's a reason why school teaches you a certain way, and they tell you to not deviate from the way that they're teaching you. And I'm about to tell you why. This also may help chefs who get frustrated when culinary students tell them, why are they teaching them to cook that way? There's more efficient ways. Well, put yourself in the position of the culinary school director. You have 20 chef instructors and all of them have differing opinions on the right way to make a veal stock or a demi-glace or an espagnole, whatever the case may be. They all know a different way to do it. But how are you going to pass a student from one class to the next class? And how are you all going to sign off and agree on something if all of you do it a different way? You're going to confuse the student. There has to be a baseline of expectation that they all agree on and say, look, we might know 100 different ways to do this, but this is how we're going to graduate our students by doing it this way, because this is the way that we all agree is the most universal method. That's why they do it. It doesn't mean that they don't know other ways, and it doesn't mean that all the other ways are wrong. It's just that school teaches you a certain way as to not confuse the student with 1,000 different ways to do it. It establishes a consistency so they could progress through the program or the curriculum with the correct answers. So students, if you're listening to this, you understand now that there are more ways to do it than what you're being taught in school. And chefs out there in the real world, you also understand now that's why they're being taught that way, is because they need to graduate them through the system. The same way it is in your kitchen. I want you to do it this way because you're working here. It's not that you don't know other ways. It's just that this is the most efficient way for you to do it while you're working at this particular place. I would never have any of the success that I've ever achieved as a chef had it not been for the chefs that came before me. As a young chef, I used to sit down and listen to the older master chefs talk And I was just quiet. I would just listen. I would absorb it. And whatever they said now to me seems like common sense, but back then it was magical. Some of the culinary advice that they'd give me, like, make sure you cook the duck fat side down. I had never cooked a duck. So I was like, okay, I remember that. I logged that into the back of my mind. It's like, duck, cook fat side down. Got it. It's like stuff that we take for granted. It's the curse of knowledge. We take it for granted now. But when you're hearing it for the first time, it's mind blowing. The old stories that I used to hear, they would test meat with skewers, metal skewers or cake testers. And I remember the chef telling me, the reason we all have mustaches is because we all have burns on our lips from the cake testers. I would always use my wrist. Sometimes I use my lower lip, whatever. A lot of times you just use a digital meat thermometer. Anyway, we digress. But that knowledge is transmitted from the previous generation of chefs to the new generation of chefs. And not just that knowledge, but a lot of the things that we do as chefs currently. If you're a chef right now running your kitchen, you might say, the only way to do this right is this way. You have to ask yourself, why do you say that? Is it because that you've iterated hundreds of times and come to that conclusion? Or is it that someone else did before you? Is it the preference of a previous chef that you worked for? The way that your chefs cooked will shape how you view food moving forward. When I got out into the real world and I had my first executive chef jobs and I wanted to do my food, I realized I really didn't have my food. Even to this day, I can't say I have my food. I cook a certain way, but it's not necessarily my food. It's stuff that my chefs have taught me that I've maybe adjusted a little bit to my style or to current trends or techniques, but it's the transfer of knowledge from the previous generation. If you go back and you watch a lot of old cooking shows, you'll see a lot of really bad habits in the kitchen. From great chefs, mind you. They got the big clunky tongs, their stations are messy, unfolded towels everywhere, their uniforms look tattered. And then they go through all this work and then they put up a dish that you're like, oh, holy crap, that food doesn't look anything like what I would serve today. Food evolved very quickly. And what you're serving right now is going to evolve in the future. It might be served by robots. But when you watch those old shows and you see the look on their faces, they were doing the most innovative food for their time. Go watch old Iron Chef and stuff that you look at like, oh, that doesn't sound good or that doesn't look good. Know that that was the hottest food at the time. Go watch old Iron Chef America and Chef Bobby Flay coming in, blowing people's minds with Chipotles. No one had ever seen those before. Now you take it for granted that you use Chipotle on everything. There's a restaurant chain. You take that for granted. But back then, they were introducing things for the first time. You have culinary traditions that are passed on from chef to chef, making things a certain way, make a pasta like this, use double O flour. No, make your gnocchi like this, you got to bake the potatoes. No, don't bake them, you got to boil them. No, don't boil them, you got to steam them, right? Everyone iterated a slightly different way, which by the way, I bake them for the record. When I was a chef, even just a few years ago, I used to think to myself, I'm putting out some of the best food I could put out, and I'm very proud of it. I was very intelligent to what the trends were. I understood what was modern, how to plate things, what the trendy ingredients were. I was very happy with the food that I was putting out. Now, I've been retired for over 2 years, even though I've dabbled in some dinners and some consulting and stuff like that. Sometimes now when I look at food, I'm like, holy shit, food has really evolved quickly. And I see things that I didn't really see 2 years ago. In 2 years, we've introduced new ingredients and new techniques. Blows my mind. But then I see a lot of chefs, which I find super interesting because I see a lot of chefs preparing old classical technical food slightly modern. They could incorporate some modern techniques, right? They might be using transglutaminase to stick the meat together instead of just using, egg white powder or whatever we had to use back then. But all of a sudden, retro is cool, plated modern. So retro techniques, modern plating, maybe more ethnic ingredients. I think it's really cool to see chefs pay homage to the classics, right? Classics reinvented. I'm all for that. That's the kind of food I like. When I think about the food that I crave, I think about like, I want a good onion soup. I want a lobster thermidor. I want a perfectly roasted chicken or a nicely cooked piece of fish, a sole or a skate wing with a beurre noisette over it. Some capers, some lemon. That's what I crave, the classics, the simple. And a lot of times, chefs need to focus on making food more simple because you always are really quick to introduce your new creativity and the new spin that you want to do on things. And you have an idea. And there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes your ideas and your spin on things is fucking it up. It's not making it better. You're actually detracting from a really good dish by messing with it a little bit too much. Let the ingredients shine. Stick to your techniques. Perfectly in-season produce doesn't need much. Perfect tomatoes don't need much. Good olive oil, good salt, maybe some burrata cheese, some pickled onions. I don't know, fresh basil, good pesto. But then you want to put your spin on it by taking the burrata and breading it and putting it in the deep fryer and serving it with a confit egg yolk fudge. It's like, well, it was just fine before that. You didn't need to do all that. You didn't need confit egg yolk fudge on the burrata with the tomatoes. The tomatoes were enough and the good olive oil. Perfect, right? So what can we do better as an industry? One, if you have a chef in your life, a mentor, a chef that you worked under, even some of you chefs that have bad relationships with your chefs, reach out to them. Thank them for what they gave you, because I'm sure there's some good with some of the bad. And if you have a good relationship with them, cherish that relationship. Reach out to them. Have a cup of coffee with them. Sometimes chefs just want to chat with the younger generation. We could not be where we are now had it not been for the generation of chefs that came before us. So big respect to those chefs. But we also won't get to where we're going if it's not for the current generation of chefs that are doing it. Anyway, you know what to do. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. Listen on Spotify. Make sure you leave 5 stars, nothing less than 5 stars. Go to chefspsa.com. Get everything there. Subscribe to the Substack. We'll see you next week. Hit the porno music.
Yo, it's André in the kitchen, mixing, dropping chef knowledge, no fiction, stirring up the beats, heating up the session. Listen close, class is in session.